Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings here on NowTV. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And boy, I appreciate you being with me so very, very much. Listen, if you have not yet hit the subscribe button to my channel, please do so that for me, okay? As I have mentioned, our viewership and our subscriber list continues to grow. I really, really appreciate that. But please help us out. Just hit the subscribe button. Doesn't cost you a dime. And now, look, if you want to contribute to our ministry, believe you me, we could certainly use any assistance, any contribution, any gift that you might wish to give. You know, it's tax exempt. And so please help us out if you can. I don't ask for support very often, but we've had several people lately who have experienced either deaths or sicknesses or loss of job, and they've had to discontinue their support. Not that they wanted to, but simply because of necessity. We fully understand that. It just doesn't help us out much. Hope you understand. And so, again, if you can help us out, we really appreciate it. Now, like I said, I don't appeal for support very often. Generally speaking, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, at the very most. So please take this in the spirit and the circumstances in which it is offered. Okay, I told you last Friday that we wanted to look at the parousia of Christ in light of what I've been examining, and that's the concept, the theme, the motif of seeing this and knowing that. And what I've shared with you is that throughout the Tanakh, that is the Old Testament, we find a theme, we find a pattern in which Yahweh, in his sovereignty, would act in judgment. And he would act in judgment by sovereignly using this nation over here to judge this nation over here. Now, when Yahweh used one nation to judge another nation, it was called the day of the Lord. It was called the day of God's vengeance. It was called the day of God's wrath, and a host of other terms even. Now, in one of my newer books that I introduced last November, almost a year ago now, entitled These Are the Days When All Things Must Be Fulfilled, I give example after example after example of how this terminology of the day of vengeance and the day of the day of the Lord's vengeance, etc., was invariably used of historical events, historical judgments. And all of those historical events, the events themselves visible to the eye, okay? But those visible historical events were called the day of the Lord. They were described as Yahweh coming out of heaven. Micah chapter 1, verse 2 and following. They are described as Yahweh coming out of heaven in flaming fire, with a shout, with a hailstorm, and destroying heaven and earth. Isaiah 13, 6 through 10 and following. So once again, the visible event was the judgment of this nation over here by this nation over here. What they saw was the invasion of the country by the nation that Yahweh was using as his instrument. They never saw with the eye Yahweh coming out of heaven. But when they saw the judgment of this nation by this nation, as predicted by Yahweh's prophets, then they knew that's the day of the Lord. The Lord himself was not optically visible. His actions in judgment, by using one nation against the other, is what they saw with the human eye. So they would see this, the historical event of the invasion of a country, judgment of a city, judgment of people. They would see this, and they would know this was the day of the Lord. This was the coming of the Lord. Now, to segue a little bit farther into our discussion this morning, not only did they see the historical event and know that it was the day of the Lord, they knew it was the Parousia of the Lord. In passage after passage after passage. And I'm not going to take a lot of time this morning to chronicle this. I've already shared with you numerous passages, okay, that use in the Septuagint, that use the Greek word prosopon. Well, prosopon, in its most fundamental, primary, basic definition, means nose. Then, of course, metaphorically, it referred to the face. Then, metaphorically, it referred to presence. The word prosopon is therefore, since it means presence, is the very first cousin. I suggest, I've never read anyone that disagreed with this. All right? I've never read any lexical testimony that denies this. And the this is this. Prosopon means presence. In the New Testament, and by the way, in the Septuagint, that's the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. In the Septuagint, we find the Greek word parousia, also used. Well, what does parousia mean? It means presence. This means, ladies and gentlemen, and by the way, when you examine those contexts in which prosopon is used and the instances in which parousia are used, they are basically being used synonymously. That's why I say this is such an important realization to grasp. Prosopon simply does not mean something different from presence. Since prosopon means presence, and since parousia means presence, and since in the Old Testament, prosopon and parousia are used in passages in the same identical way. In other words, when God used this nation to judge that nation, that was his prosopon. And when God used this nation to judge that nation, that was his parousia. I hope I'm making myself clear. I'm simply trying to show prosopon and parousia are virtual synonyms. And let me reiterate something I said a moment ago. I have not found, maybe I missed it, okay? I have not found a lexical discussion of prosopon versus parousia saying, well, prosopon means this, and it's different from parousia. No, they define them in the same way as presence. That's incredibly significant, ladies and gentlemen. And let me go just a little bit further. And I'm going to make these statements and give citations. I'm not going to give the exact exact quote or the exact citation. If you want me to document this, contact me. I will give you the book, chapter, and verses, okay? I will give you the historical references. For instance, Josephus uses the Greek word parousia to speak of God's actions in history. Actions in which people saw this event, and in seeing that historical event, they saw the parousia. Now that's Josephus, first century Jew, contemporary with Paul. And so, again, if you want the exact, precise citations, bibliographical citations, just contact me. I'll be happy to present it. And I might even spend one video giving you example after example after example. I just simply want to make the point today that prosopon and parousia are synonyms. Once again, if there's a distinction, I've never found it. So what I told you last week that I would do is I would focus on Christ's parousia and the principle, the theme, the motif of seeing this and knowing that. So that's what I want to do. And what do we find in the New Testament in regard to Christ, his parousia, and his coming, his erchomai, or his elthi being a cognate of erchomai? What do we find? Well, for beginners, we go to Matthew chapter 16. Now, beginning with verse 21 and following, and remember, Matthew chapter 16, 18 is a text in which Jesus, they were in Caesarea Philippi. And by the way, archaeologists have found incredible discoveries there. Among them, an engraving with the name of Pilate, which verifies that Pilate really was a historical person. You know, skeptics in previous ages used to say, well, you know, the entire story of Jesus is completely made up. Pilate wasn't even real. Well, now they have archaeological proof that Pilate, just like the New Testament claims, was a Roman authority. So that skeptical claim just went right out the window. So anyway, that's where Jesus and apostles were. It was a hustling, bustling city on the coastline created by Herod the Great, by the way. Nothing was there. Herod the Great created this city, created this man-made port. And again, it's absolutely amazing. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I love archaeology. I love history and the very reality of Caesarea Maritime. It's just staggering. Okay, anyway, so Jesus and his apostles are at Caesarea. And Jesus turns to his apostles and says, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Well, they begin to say, well, you know, some say you're Elijah. Some say you're John the Baptizer. Then who do men say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Jesus posed the question. And they said, Peter, impetuous as he always was, spoke up and says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. To which Jesus responded, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this unto you, but my Father which is from heaven. And Jesus then began to tell them. Point number one, he was going to be crucified, buried, and raised from the dead. But not only did he predict that he was going to be martyred, he warned them that they were going to become martyrs if they were willing to take up his cross and follow him. If any man will come after me, let him take up his cross and follow me. That tells us explicitly. He was telling them, you follow me, you're going to die. Now, why am I giving all of this? Because, as N.T. Wright very properly points out, the background to the verses that I'm about to quote you or share with you are all about martyr vindication in the establishment of the kingdom of God at the coming of the Lord. Do you see a train coming? So here we have Jesus predicting his own coming, his own martyrdom, and sharing with his apostles that they too were going to become martyrs. They're going to have to take up their cross to follow them. Then he said, and this was his promise, and this is the text that N.T. Wright comments on. The Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according to his works. Now let me stop right there just to drive something home. He has just told his apostles they're going to suffer martyrdom. But now he is promising that he, the Son of God, is going to come in vindication of his own martyrdom, and therefore in vindication of the martyrdom of all of those who are going to follow him by taking up his cross. Therefore, Matthew 16:27 is a prediction of the vindication of Christ's suffering and the suffering of his own apostles at the judgment, at his coming in judgment. And here's where it gets fascinating and significant. At his coming in judgment of every man, folks, that includes those who are going to persecute him and his apostles. So Jesus is saying, I'm going to suffer, you're going to suffer, but I'm going to come. Now look, the great majority of commentators, the great majority of them, now there is a shift taking place. I have to tell you this. There's a shift in scholarship. N.T. Wright, R.T. France, Scott McKnight are just three very, very prominent scholars' names in our world today who are openly stating when Jesus said he was going to come in the glory of the Father and reward every man, he was talking about his coming to destroy Jerusalem by incorporating in his sovereignty the Romans to destroy Jerusalem. What are these scholars saying? They are saying what I've been sharing with you now over and over and over again. That when Jesus said he was coming in the glory of the Father, he wasn't promising that he was going to come out of heaven as a 5'5" Jewish man riding on the cumulus cloud. No. What he was saying, R.T. France says this explicitly in his commentary on Matthew, Jesus was saying he was going to come in the same glory and in the same manner that the Father had come many times in the past. Folks, this is exactly what I've been saying. Now, we thus have Jesus saying, I am coming as the Father had come. Okay, let's very quickly bring in John 5:21 and following. From henceforth, the Father judges no one. Now, wait a minute. Stop right there. Remember, the Father had come in judgment many, many times in the Old Testament. He came on the clouds in the destruction of Egypt. He came with the destruction of heaven and earth in Isaiah 13. He came and the cosmos was destroyed in the destruction of Edom in 583 BC. He came in the destruction of Sodom or Sidon, and again Egypt at the hands of the Babylonians. And remember, Yahweh said, I have put my sword in the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. He is my instrument. So, once again, Jesus said, from henceforth the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, in order that, Greek word, haina, means in order that all men might honor the Son as they honor the Father. By the way, for those who deny that Jesus is God, you got to deal with John 5. Jesus said the Father sent him and gave him the full prerogative of judgment, so that when he would act in judgment, men would worship and serve him in the same way they honor the Father. As means in the same way, in the same manner, to the same degree. Jesus is claiming that by acting in judgment, he was going to be demonstrating, and we'll be having a whole lot more to say about this later, he was demonstrating that he is God. He is not the Father, because the Father gave him the prerogative, and the Father would no longer judge as he had judged. Now it's the Son who would act in judgment as the Father had acted. That's two individuals. It's not one individual under different names, which is really kind of a weird doctrine anyway. So anyway, Jesus continues. The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. Okay, this is a bit repetitious here, so hang on. How had the Son seen the Father act in judgment beforehand? Yeah, he came in judgment of Egypt, came in judgment of Tyre and Sidon, came in judgment of the Edomites, came in judgment of Cuth and Pathros in Egypt, on and on and on the list goes. Just read Ezekiel chapter 25 and Jeremiah chapter 25. There's a list of 25 nations that the Father came in judgment against them by using the Babylonians. Jeremiah 25 just explicitly says that. So yes, in John chapter 5, the Father had devoted and promoted, if you wish to use that term, had bestowed judgment prerogative on his Son. The Son could not act on his own prerogative as the Son. The Father bestowed on him that full divine sovereign authority, even as the Son. Now look, prior to his incarnation, in the beginning was the Word was with God. That means on a face-to-face equality, and the Word was God. He was not the Father, but he was God. So again, Jesus is being very explicitly clear. The Father had committed all judgment to him. He was going to act in the same way, the same manner that he had seen the Father act in judgment. Do I have to remind you again? He had never seen, no one had ever seen the Father come out of heaven riding on a literal cloud. Never. So people often tell us, and I only have a moment here. People often tell us, yeah, but you see, he committed that prerogative to the Son, so the Son has to come as the Son. No, he had to come as the Father. Listen to me very carefully. I'll be developing this next week. Jesus was not going to come to be manifested once again as a 5'5" Jewish man in a physical body. He was not going to come as a 5'5" Jewish man, even in a glorified body, visibly coming out of heaven riding that cloud. No. Jesus was going to come acting with the same divine, sovereign prerogative of judgment to judge his persecutors. Do you catch that? To judge his persecutors, to avenge the suffering of his servants who had to take up their cross to follow him. He was going to come in the glory of the Father, in judgment of those persecutors. Why? So that all men might honor him as they honor the Father, because he was going to act with the same authority and in the same way. So what that means is, folks, Jesus wasn't promising to come out of heaven once again in a physical human body, visible to the naked eye. No, he was going to use the Romans, the persecutors. He was going to judge more accurately. He was going to judge the Jews who were his persecutors, guilty of killing him, but he was going to use the Romans to persecute and to destroy the Jews. I am absolutely out of time. Don't forget, tomorrow I'm debating Richard Carrier on MythVision.com. Tune in for that debate. See you there.